High above the morning clouds, where eagles rarely venture and airplanes seem like distant silver specks far below, drifted a secret that defied every law of physics and logic. A small island floating serenely through the sky, as if gravity had simply forgotten it existed. The island was no larger than a few city blocks, covered in the most impossibly green grass that seemed to glow with its own inner vitality, surrounded by waterfalls that cascaded into nothingness before transforming into mist that fed the clouds below. The discovery happened quite by chance during a hot air balloon ride that had drifted much higher than intended, carried upward by unexpected thermal currents until the balloon found itself floating at an altitude where the air was thin and crystalline clear. At first, the floating island appeared to be just another cloud formation, perhaps a bit more solid-looking than usual, but as the balloon drifted closer, its impossible reality became undeniable. Trees growing from soil that hung suspended in mid-air, flowers blooming in gardens that existed without any visible means of support. Landing on the floating island felt like stepping into a dream that had somehow become solid and real. The grass beneath foot was softer than the finest carpet, springy and alive in a way that suggested each blade was individual and conscious. Ancient trees grew in perfect groves around the island's perimeter, their branches heavy with fruit that looked like it had been polished by celestial gardeners, while their leaves rustled with music that sounded like whispered secrets about the nature of flight and freedom. At the center of the island stood a small pavilion built from what appeared to be crystallized clouds, translucent walls that shifted and shimmered like aurora borealis frozen into architectural form, supporting a roof that seemed to be made from woven sunbeams and morning mist. Inside this impossible structure, cushions made from condensed rainbow light provided seating that was somehow more comfortable than any earthly furniture, arranged around a fountain that flowed upward instead of down, its water defying gravity in spiraling helixes that created their own gentle music. The view from the floating island was beyond description. Endless sky stretching in every direction, other islands drifting lazily in the distance like a scattered archipelago of dreams, and far below, the ordinary world looking like a detailed map spread across a vast tape. Cities appeared as tiny clusters of lights, rivers became silver ribbons threading through green and brown patches, and mountains looked like wrinkles in an enormous blanket, all of it peaceful and perfect from this celestial vantage point. The island's gardens defied every rule of botany and horticulture. Flowers bloomed in colors that had no names, their petals, so delicate they seemed to be made from solidified fragrances, releasing scents that triggered memories of every peaceful moment ever experienced. Trees bore fruit that tasted like crystallized happiness, while vegetables grew in neat rows that somehow arranged themselves according to principles of beauty, rather than mere agricultural efficiency. Wildlife on the floating island was equally impossible and wonderful. Birds with feathers that caught and held starlight nested in trees that swayed not with wind, but with some celestial rhythm that matched the island's slow drift through the upper atmosphere. Butterflies with wings like stained glass windows fluttered among flowers that seemed to have been designed specifically for their pleasure, while luminescent creatures that might have been earthbound fireflies transformed into something more magical, moved through the grass like living points of light. Time moved differently on the floating island, stretching and contracting according to the needs of anyone fortunate enough to discover this aerial paradise. Minutes could expand into hours of perfect contentment spent lying in the impossibly soft grass, watching cloud formations drift past at eye level, or hours could compress into moments of such pure joy that they felt eternal and complete, requiring no extension or enhancement to achieve perfection. The air itself on the floating island was unlike anything breathed at ground level, pure and sweet, charged with energies that seemed to nourish not just the lungs, but the entire being, creating a sense of lightness that went beyond the mere absence of gravitational pull. Each breath felt like drinking liquid peace, while exhaling released tensions and worries that simply dissolved into the crystalline atmosphere and disappeared forever. As day progressed toward evening, though the island seemed to exist partially outside normal time, making concepts like day and night somewhat flexible, the entire aerial paradise began to glow with its own inner light. The grass became luminescent, The trees sparkled like they were decorated with living stars, and the pavilion at the center transformed into something that looked like it had been built from captured aurora, pulsing gently with colors that had no earthly equivalent. The sunset viewed from the floating island was a masterpiece that made every earthbound sunset seem like a pale imitation. Colors painted the sky in layers of impossible beauty, not just the usual reds and oranges, but purples deeper than amethyst, golds brighter than any metal, and blues that seemed to contain the essence of every peaceful moment that had ever existed. The sun itself appeared larger and more gentle from this altitude, like a benevolent eye closing slowly to allow the stars their moment of glory. When stars finally appeared, they seemed close enough to reach out and touch, hanging in the clear thin air like jewelry scattered across black velvet. The Milky Way blazed overhead with such brilliance that it cast actual shadows on the island's surface, while planets gleamed like nearby lanterns, suspended in the cosmic darkness. From this elevated perspective, the connection between Earth and cosmos became viscerally apparent, not just intellectually understood, but felt in the bones and blood, as an undeniable truth about the interconnected nature of all existence. Eventually, like all dreams, the time came to leave the floating island and return to the mundane world of gravity and solid ground. But the memory of that aerial paradise remained vivid and transforming. The memory of what it felt like to drift above the clouds in a place where impossible beauty was simply the natural order of things, where peace wasn't something to be achieved, but something that existed as naturally as breathing, where the boundaries between dream and reality dissolved completely, leaving only wonder, gratitude, and the unshakable knowledge that magic exists everywhere for those with eyes to see and hearts open enough to receive the gifts that float just above the ordinary world, waiting patiently to be discovered by anyone brave enough to rise above the familiar and drift into the realm where all things become possible.